tonight's talk. And my name is Tianyue Wu. I'm a Berggruen Fellow at the China Center of the Institute. And our speaker today is Professor Dominique Lestel. Professor Lestel is now teaching contemporary philosophy at École normale supérieure in Paris. And his main field is philosophical ethology. And this is a field which explores how human being is constituted in his life, shared with things other than human beings, like fungi, plants, animals, robots, and even ghosts.
And ghosts.
Yeah, and so you can see he actually crossed the traditional division of philosophy into metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, political philosophy, etc. So he tries to bring these different dimensions together to understand what human being is in a bigger context, yeah, with other things in this field. And Professor Lestel has published widely in this field. Some of his books have been translated into English, as you can see on the handouts, and books like A Journey to the End of Species, and this book, Carnivore, a Manifesto, The Friend of My Friend, and the recent one is The Philosophical Ethology of Dominique Lestel. And tonight he will give us a talk on emerging technologies, disruptive science, and the future of humanity. So please join me to welcome Professor Lestel.
Okay, disruptive technology. Okay, I'm very happy to be here and to give that talk, invited by the Berggruen Institute, and I wish to thank the staff of the Berggruen once again. They are very nice people and very efficient people. Some of the ideas I shall discuss here have been worked during my stay at Stanford University last year with the Berggruen Fellowship, and it has been a very fruitful time, as you will maybe show. So the topic of the talk is a very adventurous topic. It's not philosophy as done, but philosophy in the making. I really try to make sense of the world as it is today and to develop a philosophy that could be a way to do that. A philosophy that is a field philosophy, a philosophy that not only tries to understand other philosophers, but also tries to understand the world and to make philosophy part of the world and of the world making. So today I wish to talk about emerging technologies, disruptive science, and the future of humanity. The question of the future of humanity is a question that has not been discussed too much by philosophers in the last decades, which is a little bit a pity. There are few exceptions. I told you about one or two, but very few philosophers have been interested by that topic because it sounds too much, science fiction. But basically, what we begin to understand is that the world is science fiction, and that we have to understand it in that way too. Emerging technologies I have in mind, as you will see, especially what we call nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, and technologies of information and communication, and the convergence of all these technologies. It means that we have more and more machines involving both the results of all these technologies. An interesting point about these technologies is that some of them are very different from more classical technologies. We will discuss a little bit about that too. Disruptive sciences are sciences that really transform our vision of the world. And I can give you only one example among others. Astronomy right now is really a disruptive science, especially with the discovery of exoplanets. It means planets outside of the solar system. And we will see that this is a tremendous discovery that could change deeply the vision that we have of the world and of our position in the world. And the future of humanity is what we will be, not tomorrow, not next week, but in 10,000 years. And you could say, well, 10,000 years, well, that's too big a deal. But basically, it's probably easier to know what will be the world and humanity in 10,000 years than in 50 years. Remember, you are too young. Most of you are much too young for that. But before the end of the Cold War, everybody was convinced up to the end of that Cold War that it will lead for hundreds of years. And it has been surprisingly quick and surprisingly surprising for everybody living at that time. So surprise is a basic characteristic of the world. And we have to take that in mind, especially if you are a philosopher. So first, we can begin by the beginning, and the beginning is the theory of evolution. And Darwin is the great theoretician of evolution, even if he was not alone. Wallace was as important as Darwin, but we keep in mind Darwin. And the phylogenesis, it means the history of life, and the fact that we know that we belong to that history, which was not for sure for a long time, where theologians and religious people think that human beings were really a part of other living creatures. But now we know that we are a kind of ape, a kind of smart ape, and that we have to be thought like that. But we also are a particular ape, and we also have to take care of that. So how to think humanity to come to two ways, two regular conceptions today. The first one is what I should call the post-human, which means that humans has become obsolete. We have to transform human in order to find another kind of human, which is basically a kind of a superhuman, a human that has particularities like immortality that we have no, but that we are supposed to wish. The second regular conception is the conception of the humanism, the fact that we as a human have to take care of the world and of other people, and that each people is very important as it is, and so on. I will propose a third way, the pan-human. And the pan-human, as you will see, is a way to think the future of humanity in the convergence with other kinds of living beings. In other words, it's the complete reverse of the traditional vision that sees the human as distinct of all other living beings. It means pan-human means the pan-human vision of the world means that we humans become more human when we are closer, we go closer to other living beings. We'll see what it will mean. The cosmo-humanities are the field of inquiry about that kind of questions, the future of humanity, the place of humanity in the universe. And I wish to show the contemporary context of cosmo-humanities. Of course, cosmo-humanities, that's the word I give for that, but of course, cosmo-humanity is not very new. As soon as you have human societies, you have people thinking about the future of their societies, about their past, about what it means, about the relationships with other living entities, including ghosts, as you have heard not a long time ago. So the contemporary, I'm interested by the contemporary context of cosmo-humanities, and the reason for which that context is very new in a certain way. There are a couple of specificities we have to discuss about the fact that we humans are supposed to be a distinctive animal, the discovery of exoplanets, the growing of the biotechnologies and the possibilities, the new possibilities of biotechnologies, as the modification of the genome, of the human genome, and also all the possibilities of hybridization with diverse technical devices, including your smartphone. Nanotechnologies, it means the technologies are very, very small. It means the possibility to do a nano engineering. It means an engineering at the level of the atom. The problem of artificial intelligence and robotics, and as you know, there have been tremendous progress since a couple of years. We'll see that a little bit more in detail. And the question of climate change and breakdown of biodiversity, a very huge problem we will have to deal with in the coming decades, and the atomic bomb. We used to forget the problem of the atomic bomb, but we still have the technology to make 1,000,000 times and more to make the disappearance of the planet and the disappearance of all living beings on the planet. And we have to keep that in mind because it's really part of the cosmo-humanities. To think about that is really part of the cosmo-humanities today. There's technologies. There's emergent technologies have some particularities we have to keep in mind also in order to understand what I wish to tell you tonight. The first one is that these technologies are no more, for some of them, some of the most interesting of them, are no more to be thought like prostheses, but more in terms of symbiosis or partnerships. We will not use our new technologies to do something. We will share our life with them. We will be transformed by them, not only because we will be able to do more things, but we will be different with these technologies. We can discuss about the notion of partnerships. Is it really the right word to make sense of the relationships we have with our technologies, or is it too much science fiction? I think that generally we will be always too low in our imaginations. One of my favorite philosophers is Günther Anders, a German philosopher, who was working during the 20th century, and it is interesting because he put the finger about the fact that imagination is one of the great handicaps we have as a human, or more exactly, the lack of imagination. We have transformed the world in a way that our imagination could not handle. And that's part of our problem, of our main problem. These technologies not only allow us to reach our goals, but generate new goals. And that's also the question of the obsolescence of the opposition between means and goals, the regular opposition in philosophy between means and goals. It doesn't work anymore. And the most difficult tool that for thinking the future of humanity, we have to take into account cultural differences. And I think that this is a basic point. We used to think of the future of human as a kind of universal human, because we used to think the future of humanity at the level of the species. But this is the wrong way to think. I think the cultural differences, as we already see, have no reason to vanish. Or, on the contrary, there are good reasons to be increased. So first, the question of the distinctive animal in the context, contemporary context of cosmo-humanities. I will not see everything. I just show you some questions, some developments in some of the most interesting field of research today. So we know that Homo sapiens is a distinctive ape nevertheless. That we are driven by value, which is, it seems, quite different from most of other animals. Most people and most philosophers say not of most of animals, but of all of animals. But my reserves comes in particular because of the difficulties to make sense of such questions about animals. Before to say that such or such features do not exist in animals, you have to wonder whether we have a good methodology to think about these questions and to do research on these points. We share 98.4% of genes with chimpanzees, which is not so easy to understand. With the common chimpanzees, Pan-troglodytes, it sounds to be very, very great, which is true, but it also means that difference of 1.6% of genes means that 48 millions of nucleotides are different, which is, as you know, not so small. And some of the genes play a major role. I mean, the question is not only a quantitative question, but also a qualitative question about the genes. And we know, for instance, that one gene, FOXP12, plays a major role in the ability, in the human ability for language. We also know that humans have a unique cultural biodiversity. It means that it has not only cultural abilities, but a great diversity of cultures, in particular in languages. And to give you only one example, we know between 4,000 languages right now, let's say a couple of thousand. We know that from the Neolithic time, we have lost a couple of 10,000 languages, a little bit more. But we also know that we have definitively lost hundreds of thousands of languages before the Neolithic times, which means that we do not know a lot about human languages from the point of view of their diversity. And humans have also spiritual beliefs, so we can discuss about that later. In particular, about the difficulty to show that some animals at least, have no spiritual abilities or have spiritual abilities. Not so clear, not so easy to have a clear answer to that questions. And to think about these problems, we have to take that in mind. We have to to be aware that we do not know a lot of things, and that we do not know how to know a lot of things. Not only that we do not know, but we do not know how to do. The contemporary context of cosmo-humanity, that's also the exoplanets, the very tremendous discoveries, there's last years. Let's think about the fact that in the 90s, astronomers have discovered the first exoplanets. 90s, that's not so far away, even if some of you have been born in that time. But we have had a direct detection only since 2004, and since that we have discovered, as you see, thousands of exoplanets. And the estimation of the exoplanets is 100 billions in our solar galaxy. And there are many galaxies in the universe. But in our own galaxy, estimation of the exoplanet is 100 billions of planets. And 9 billions of planets like Earth in our galaxy only, which means planets on which life could be developed. In other words, what it means, if you think a little bit about this number, is that the question is no more, is there any extraterrestrial civilization, but where are they? Because the probability that such an extraterrestrial civilization exists is near 100%, which is so big that we have extreme difficulty to think what it means to understand what is a human and what is the place of the human. The contemporary context of cosmo-humanities, that's also artificial intelligence and robotics. Here I have give you three pictures related to different aspects of that questions. Here you have Frankenstein. As you know, that's a very famous literary figure of the 19th century, in a novel written by Mary Shelley at the beginning of the 19th century, telling the story of a mad scientist building an artificial man. Not Frankenstein, because Frankenstein is the name of the guy, but the Frankenstein's creatures, whose one particularity is precisely that he had no name. He was not named. And the second particularity was that he wished to have children. And it was the main reproach he had toward this creature. I wish to have children. The second picture is Ishiguro, who is one famous Japanese roboticist, with one of his most known robot. Okay, could you tell me who is the robot and who is Ishiguro? No, you are wrong. It's the other one. Basically, Ishiguro is here, and the robot is here. But I may be wrong. The fact is that you can't stay in front of them. If you go behind, you can, because there are a lot of structures going out of the head of the robot, and not of Ishiguro, not yet. And what is interesting is that that roboticist has designed a robot that looks exactly like him. And it was a problem. It was a problem for Ishiguro. Why? Because Ishiguro became older and older and not the robot. Therefore, he had to make an aesthetic surgery in order to look back like his robot. I leave you think about that. That's a good philosophical questions. What is interesting in that context is as you know, the invention of deep learning, which is a new technique of programmation, was the characteristic that what is at stake is not to learn a machine to do something, but to learn a machine to learn to do something, which means a lot of things. First, that you have not, as a human, to understand what is at stake with what you wish your machine learn, because your machine could learn it alone. The second is that you do not know what your machine could learn and what it could not, but by an empirical process. And the third way, not the less impressive, is that even if your machine succeeds to do something, you will never know how it will do it, which is very scaring for many things. Let me give you only one example. If you decide, as it has been seen during the Cold War, precisely, to design an automatic system to put bombs on the enemy. If you let a machine like that do that, you are under the threat of a machine you don't understand how it works. In March 2016, AlphaGo, one of that program, has been able to beat the world champion in Go, Lee Sedol. So the machine became champion of the world. Question, what was happening there? In other words, to be a winner in Go, is it really to win like that, or is it also another process? The question has never been asked, but I think it should be. Why? Because, in fact, when you try to design machines to do things like that, what the machine has to do is transformed. Let me give you an example. You wish to learn a machine to speak, and you have a machine that speaks. But at the end, you have a different way to speak. In other words, you can't speak the same way with a machine that speaks or with a machine that doesn't. In other ways, also, all these simulations are not so much simulation than transformation of the world. The third picture refers to a movie some of you have maybe seen. It's the movie of a guy who falls in love with an operator system with a very charming feminine voice, but it's an operating system, and he really falls in love with that voice, and with is behind that voice, which means nothing because there is nothing behind that voice, and he just understood what is at stake when the guy, that's a guy. The guy is a little bit jealous, and he is talking with the voice, and at the time he asked the voice, well, do you have the same kind of conversation with other men? And the voice answered, yes, naturally. And he asked, how many men? And the voice answered, I don't know, I should say 10,000. And at that point, the guy understood that he doesn't understand anything about the relationships he has with that voice. What does it mean to be in love in a time where you can be in love with an artificial voice like that? And what does it mean to be in love with a real woman when you have the possibility to be in love with disembodied voices like that? So I will not give you more example. I just wish to give you the context of the cosmo-humanities. Now, the post-human project meets three kinds of technology. The post-human approach is an answer to the transformation of the world I just told you about. The difficulty, the human project is to try to, here is Ray Kurzweil from the Silicon Valley, and here is Bostrom, one of the main writer and philosopher about the post-human. And the post-human is to cure human from its disability, to cure human from death, to look for immortality, to cure human from sickness, to look for a human never sick, and to cure a human from stupidity, to make human much smarter than they have ever been. And that guys are very smart, but also very dumb. We will maybe see that. What I wish to attract your attention about 4 difficulties of the post-human project. The first one is a moral difficulty. Do we have the right to modify the human being? I mean, not through natural evolution, but through artificial transformation, which will lead, of course, to an artificial evolution. A political difficulty. Is it a technoscience for wealthy people? I mean, all these technologies are very expensive. All these guys are very successful entrepreneurs in the Silicon Valley or in other parts of the world. What about the poor people? The problem is the political difficulty is that for the first time in the history of humanity, the ruling class could be different from a species point of view, from a biological point of view, from the other classes. An evolutionary difficulty. No species has never chosen its biological modification. Well, that's not exactly true. Maybe we could discuss with biologists about that, but I remember a paper published in Nature in 1988 by John Cairns, in which he showed that bacteria could choose their mutations, which means that they could have an influence upon their evolutionary process. And the fourth point, first difficulty, a technological difficulty. Will human be enslaved by machines? An idea not so new, because British writer Samuel Butler was the first to ask the questions in a letter sent to a magazine. You know, British people like to send letters to magazine and newspaper in 1863, in which he was explaining that we are in an evolutionary competition. We humans are in an evolutionary competitions with machines, and we already have lost. 1863, no robots, no computers, no smartphones. Okay. So opposition to post-human trend, 3 kinds of oppositions. The humanist opposition, which means we have to go back to the classical humanist positions in the classical culture. It will be, I think, Confucius for you in China. It's Erasmus for us in Western countries. The tribal reactions, the idea that we have to go back to a tribal regulation of the life, and the pan-human postures I shall explain you. Here is a picture of one of my Japanese friends, Sonoe. Sonoe is a very successful entrepreneur of Tokyo, who was a director of a travel agency for teddy bears. Yeah, well, you have well heard. She make travel teddy bears. So you could smile. You will smile a little bit less if I tell you that she does that for many years, and that she has more than 500 regular clients. I mean, client ready to pay for make touristing your teddy bears around around the world and around Japan. So let's keep that in your mind about the fact that what could we understand about technologies first, and second, extremely complex technologies that not necessarily is the most interesting to about which we have to take care, because you know teddy bears is, you all have had a teddy bear when you were children, and that's interesting to know what it means to interact, to live with technology. Opposition to human trends, that's an opposition that has been well described by the theoretician of literature George Steiner, which is always to go back to the value of the humanist tradition of to be kind with people, to be educated, to know classics, to be able to read, to talk easily, to be polite, and so on. The opposition to post-human trends too is the tribal reaction. Especially it has been described and thought by French philosopher Raymond Rouillé. Nobody knows Raymond Rouillé. Even in France, very few people knows Raymond Rouillé, but I can tell you that it will be one of the successful French philosophers in the coming years. He's dead, but we have to discover what he has written. He has written many books and many papers, very interesting. And one of his most interesting book is that one, the 100 next centuries about the future of humanity, where it said that we have three categories of people. The engineers who think that the world is technical problems and that all the problems could have technical solutions. The hedonists who just wish to have good time in the world. And what he said, the long-living humans, the guys who really wish to live a long time for centuries, and who were really warriors of times. And one of the main arguments of Rouillé is that we are very good now to be fighters, to be warriors of space. We are very good to conquer new species, to go in new species, but we are very bad to conquer time, to be warriors of time. And in 100 centuries, only the good warriors of times will survive. And he said that the only way to survive through a particular philosophy, I don't wish to give you too much detail here, is that the form of the tribe with a head, with a woman devoted to the generation of children and the education of those children, a very traditional vision of the world. The third opposition to post-human trend is the pan-human posture. The pan-human posture is how to think human being in an ecocentric perspective. It cuts with the idea that we humans, we are human because we have cut our links with other living beings, especially with other animals. It thinks, on the contrary, that to be human means to be involved with non-human agents, especially animals and plants, and that one of the future we have to deal with is the coming back to the convergence with non-human living agents. You have seen the phylogenetic trees of the first pictures. It's always from the past up to the future in an irreversible way. So let's try to think about that phylogenetic trees, not like a trees, but like a space in which you can travel, and to develop special relationships with such or such living non-human living beings. So the idea is to think the future of humanity in another way. I've not been the first to try to make that. I can tell you about at least two other people. One is an American philosopher that still have to be discovered, Paul Shepard, and the second is a science fiction writer, Philip Kindred Dick. Maybe you know Dick because he has written, you have heard about Dick, because he has written that wonderful book, Do Androids Dream of Electrical Ships? And maybe if you have not read the book, you have seen the movie, Blade Runner, who is a story of super robots looking like humans, exactly like humans, but on one point, in competition with humans. And in that competition between their super robots, replicants, and the humans have to establish an alliance, an union with other animals, because it's through a test that it's possible for humans to see, to discover what are the replicants, where they are. So we have the main idea of the philosopher Paul Shepard, that we are human through the texture of animality. It means that we are human because we are impregnated, because we are full of animals. And the idea of Philip K. Dick that to be able to deal with the new intelligent machines, we will have to establish alliances, political alliances with animals. Yeah. The question is only to know how long will be a minute. So what I propose here is a reanimalization of human, which is that reanimalization is justified at many levels. A practical level, about what we wish to do, an ethical level, an aesthetic and design level, and we have many artists working on that way. An ethical level with the empathy increasing because of the possibility to be, not to see, but to be an animal in these positions, and a political level and the search for identity. To be from a particular species is a way for you to have an identity, as now you dress yourself in a certain way, you have tattoos and stuff like that. So there are many examples. This is the pictures refers to a Japanese artist, Ai Kazasawa, who has proposed to be pregnant with endangered species. In other words, the project is that the woman should give birth to endangered species in a kind of human-animal not transfecundation, but transbirth. We have many levels. Some are very shallow with imitation of the behaviors, and others very deep, like engendering oneself the animal or becoming oneself an animal. And one of the artists I told you, you showed on the pictures below, Marion Laval-Jantet, has had a transfusion of blood of an horse, and has become for a couple of days a kind of hybrid between human and horse. So to finish, what pan-human perspective means, and it means that we have two challenges for Homo sapiens. The first is two main challenge. The first is to survive in a planet deeply transformed by global warming and by technology and by overpopulation. And the second is to become ready to explore the planet and to inhabit them. An important idea is that we will have the ability at the same time to converge with non-human living and to be one's own species. And we can discuss further about what it means that each of us could be a species as such. We have to know that to be a member of a species is becoming not anymore a collective legacy, but an individual choice. And what it means, it really means, is very disturbing if you think a little bit about that. And you could say that it's not possible to interact with as deeply as that with species. But I remember you that the notion of species is not so clear in biology. And I wish to conclude, and I hope that I have not exceeded too much my 5 last minutes, about the idea to be a philosopher in the context of the cosmo-humanities. And I think that it's necessary to revive the project of a very speculative philosophy. Philosophers have to show imaginations, conceptual rigor and imagination. It goes together. And we already have had some previous philosophers like that. Philosophers you certainly have no idea about, but you have a very good professor of medieval philosophy here who could have told about them. Giordano Bruno, Tommasello Campanelos, Cyrano de Bergerac, all these philosophers of the 16th and 17th century have had a great imagination and have developed a philosophy with great imagination. We have to go out of the canons of pure analysis. We could be back on that too, and about the necessity to mix philosophy and autobiography and fiction and art, and to invent an hybrid space at the crossroad of philosophy, science, technology, and science fiction. I think that science fiction is not a way to illustrate philosophy. I think that science fiction could be philosophy as such. Narrative philosophy, but good philosophy nevertheless. Thank you very much.
Just 5 minutes. Okay, so Professor Lestel gave us a very rich picture of the challenges from emerging technologies. So we have seen many examples from the discovery of exoplanets and the new development of artificial intelligence and many others. And he also addresses different approach to deal with this challenge. And in particular, he talks about post-humanism and its problems, its difficulties, and other approaches like humanism or new humanism and tribalism and his own pan-humanism. And we have seen here he proposed a new strategy to survive the challenges from this disruptive, in his term, disruptive sciences, the sciences that can totally change our vision of ourselves and also our vision of the whole world. And he gives some proposal for the future, for the philosophy in the future. So I think a lot of things have been condensed in such a short talk, and you must have many questions and comments. So I open the floor to you.
Maybe you can have Chinese questions and translate them.
Okay,
I think some could be shy to ask in English.
Yeah. Professor said, you can also ask questions in Chinese if you want. I can try my best to translate.
Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for this insightful presentation. So I have a question regarding your proposal at the slide for re-animalization of human as justified at many levels. If you don't mind, can we go back to that slide? Re-animalization. So from what I'm re-animalizing. So from what I'm inferring that there seems to be a convergence to a mononistic value system in which we want to create like the so-called the more perfect human being. And my question is, how do we preserve the diversity that makes us a resilient population, that each of us are different if we all aim to engineer our human condition towards one singular goal? How do we preserve the diversity that's fundamental to our human condition? And
you mean the human diversity?
Human diversity, and related to that, from my opinion, that to be imperfect is a fundamental human condition. So if we're moving so close towards perfection, if we lose this so-called imperfection that makes us fallible, are we still humans? Right. That's my question.
Okay, thank you for your interesting questions. The loss of human biodiversity is no really a problem here, I think, because I don't propose a massive program. It's a program for some people who wishes to be engaged in that, and it has potentially no impact about human biodiversity. But if there is some problems with climate changes, where all human population have to find a way to survive in new conditions, and in that case, the human biodiversity will have been lost nevertheless. So either it's not a problem, or it's too much a problem that it's no more a problem. Okay? And second, about your imperfection, I think that you're right. To be imperfect is a part of what it means to be a human being. But that's the program of the posthuman. The posthumans wish to be perfect. They wish to avoid death, to avoid sickness, to avoid stupidity. But they lose their humanity. They become just machine. And we see that in the proposition of people like Ray Kurzweil to upload them into machines, which means to upload their mind into machines in order to survive eternally. It means nothing. What does it mean to upload your mind in a machine? Okay, I think that nobody have an idea about what it means. But you can imagine, you can figure out what it could mean. And what it could mean is just that you lose your humanity. Okay. With the pan-human approach, you do not look for any perfection. You just look for diversity. You just look for biological diversity, for behavioral diversity, for sensing diversity, and for establishing new kinds of community with animals. If you can live in deep sea waters, in deep sea oceans, you can establish new kinds of communities with animals living there. Where is the perfection? There is no perfections. You do not, paradoxically, you both go out of the evolutionary process and you stay in the evolutionary process. You just have a new way to provoke innovation. But that's all.
Professor, thank you for a very illuminating and thought-provoking speech. So personally, I drafted my undergrad dissertation upon animalization of communication. So I feel like I have some more intellectual proximity and resonance with the speech you gave today. So I have one question and one comment. My question is, you're talking about pan-human, which you attach great importance to the animality of human, but you also said that cultural difference will never vanish for all sake. So I was just wondering how to deal with the internal theoretical inconsistency within this framework. Because we believe the animality is part of humanity. Because if you're human, then you have this kind of animality which is universal as a human being. But you also said the cultural difference, which is a difference among human beings, will never vanish. How do you deal with this? That's my question. And now I have a comment in terms of how do we have a philosophical understanding of the disruptive science. But so my personal understanding philosophically about disruptive science is that so AI, robots, so on and so forth, will become a proxy. So a proxy of human beings means that it's a more intelligent and stuff that possess some degree of autonomy. So the problem actually lies in that how do we deal with this kind of autonomy? So we already have computer, we already have so many tools, but these kind of tools right now we have today has some degree of autonomy, and how should we deal with this kind of autonomy with ourselves? So we, as human beings, also have some autonomy. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay, about your comment, I'm not sure that you really. I should have a comment about your comment, not an answer about your no question. About the autonomy you can have with your technologies, yeah, like smartphone. We could also describe that kind of autonomy as a kind of dependency to the big corporations that have the technologies. So the picture is not so clear, and there is no reasons to think that what will happen will be the continuation of what is happening right now. About your first questions about diversity of human and cultural diversity and
so you said that there will be cultural difference which will never vanish among human beings.
Yeah.
But you also said that we should shed more light on the so-called animality of human beings. How would you deal with this kind of inconsistency from a personal perspective?
But I don't think that there is any inconsistency, but maybe I may be wrong. You can have some common grounds or animality with a different way to deal with that and with that animality. And our animality is not a given, a legacy that we have in a passive way. In other words, you can be your animal in different ways. You have no one way to be your animal or to become your animal. In that way, you can have both human biodiversity and cultural diversity, and a new way to deal with your biological part of yourself. Okay.
Thank you very much for your talk. In your book, The Friend of Friends, you talk about the diverse nature of dyactic relations between humans and animals. And from today's talk, it's clear that our potential journey to becoming pan-human requires a kind of symbiotism between humans and animals. But in that agreement, we're the only party that can actively give consent to that relationship happening. So in your vision of the future, with this reanimalization of humans, how do you think about the rights of animals and what they might want to do in the vision of the future?
Okay, the right of animals is a deep question. And I don't think there is any problem here. But I understand that you could find problem.
Like that cat, for example, might not want
that cat. Okay, bad example. Because it's not a common cat. It's a cat living with Marion Lavaljanté, and the interactions between both is very big. Marion Lavaljanté is not only an artist; she's also a shaman, and she is interacting with animals in very deep ways. And as you know, a cat never does what he doesn't want to do. It will be a dog, the question will be different. But a cat, you never can do to a cat what he doesn't want to do. So its agreement has not to be given. If he doesn't want, he doesn't want. But let's figure out the possibility that he doesn't want, and that he is in the obligation to do that. For instance, that he's not a cat but a dog, or a rabbit, or an animal like that. So what is his right to refuse that relationships? I would answer, maybe in a little bit provocative way, that is the same right than the children who doesn't wish to be educated by his parents. In other words, I don't think that we are in a legal, rigorous situations, and the notion of rights doesn't seem to fit with that. I think that what you have in mind is absolutely legitimate. What you have in mind is in which ways could we have the agreement of an animal to participate to these experiments? Does it make sense to have that agreement or not?
I think that one thing is also that when we can decide to become more animal, but an animal can't decide to become human. So it's like a one-way direction.
Yeah, no, that's yeah, yeah.
Can't become more human.
Okay, but you have examples of animals becoming humans. The point is that usually that's a human who decides that the animal will become more human and not the reverse. But we can discuss about that really in the details, because I think it will be interesting. I have worked a lot on my first book was published about ape talking experiments. All those experiments in which humans have tried to teach human language to great apes or to parrots, to birds. And the question is a little bit the same. They have no they have not agreed to do that. But I don't think that the legal background was the good situation to think about this very important problems.
I have a follow-up here.
Yeah.
Maybe we should give liberty to some human beings to live as a member of other species, but should we grant the right to other beings, something like a robot, a smart robot, to live like a human being, to become a member of human species?
To give the
If robots can have the autonomy or the power to make a decision, so should we grant him or her or it the right to become a member of human species?
Actually, just to add on to Professor's question, actually there was a case in Saudi Arabia, October 2017. The robot Sophia was granted citizenship by Saudi Arabia, but she's a robot. So I think that's what Professor is.
So you are right, both. But the questions of the agreement of the robot to be a member of a human species will never be that way. One question is to know what it means to be a human when you are a robot. And I have developed the idea that to be a human is not to follow some a priori rules, but to be accepted in the community of humans. In other words, it's a kind of it's a process, like in a British club. The question is, could you be a member of a British club? And there is absolutely no reason that there is a rational way for you to do that, because this is a British club. And to be a human or to be a living being, that's the same. To become a human for a robot will not be an exam, a test. Do you have that property, or that property? But because you live together, the robots and the human, the robots will be considered as maybe not a human, but a kind of human. Let's recall the fact that in the philosophy there are many discussions about the possibility to rape for example, to rape a virtual creature in video games. But to rape a virtual creatures mean to rape pixels. No, and you do not rape pixels because they are just pixels. But that's not so simple. And with that question, we see that to belong or not to belong to humanity, and it doesn't mean necessarily to belong to human species. And that's interesting too. To belong to humanity is not a question that could receive a simple answer, because this is not an intellectual question. This is an existential question. It means a robot will become a human or like a human when he will have a place of human in a human community.
Last speaking English is not good. Would you mind speaking Chinese?
Yeah, so you can speak in. You can ask me.
My question is about I like her. So I speak Chinese. 我的问题就是，就像是刚才讲的，据你所知的话，现在有没有个人或者机构正在研究，是在驯化其他的物种，更多的物种，来为人类服务？这是第一个问题。第二个问题呢，就是说，既然人类可以被教育的话，在这个地球上生活的很好，为什么就是说其他的物种，更多的物种，当然是还未被驯化的物种，能不能是也像人类一样？在生活在地球上，而且的话，这会不会是一个趋势？既然是颠覆性科学的话，颠覆性科学也可以这么做。
第二个问题，您能再表述一下？我没有太跟上，就是说其他没有驯化的物种。
对，就是有没有可能像人类，既然人类被教育的生活在这个地球上，那么既然其他的物种会不会也有这个需要人类来激发他们的潜力，也像被驯化以后，然后再生活在这个地球上，也许可以更好的为人类服务。
他们是要被驯化还是不被驯化？
被驯化，
被驯化。
因为人类已经被驯化，不是被驯化，被教育。生活在地球上，人生活在挺好。其他物种为什么？而且话，这会不会是一个趋势？谢谢。
I will try. So he has two questions. So first one is about a fact. So do you know any individual or institutions trying to tame more species to serve human beings, to tame other species of animals to serve human beings?
A lot. A lot of humans and of groups are taming non-human species to help human species. I can give you only one example, especially because it's a controversial one, but it worked pretty well in a certain way, but not necessarily in the way we used to think. It's the relationships between autist children and dolphins. It seemed that when autist children were interacting with dolphins, they became better. And we have had many programs about that. And one anthropologist has worked on that to know why it worked. And she showed that it didn't. And she was very angry about herself, because she understood that it was very good for the family of the autist child to think that the interactions with the dolphin was improving, and that after her papers, they could not do that, and thus she had improved nothing, but she has destroyed her hope in a family, which is a rare case of deep intellectual anthropological honesty. And I can tell that because I don't like absolutely that anthropologist. So I can be very positive about that work. In that work, you see a program with interacting dolphins and children. But in the history of of peasants. You always have links like that with the dogs, with the sheep, with always.
So the second question is also related to it.
I have excuse me. Mm-hmm. There is a book published 2 or 3 years ago by an American archaeologist, an anthropologist, about the reasons for which Homo sapiens have been wider in the competition with Neanderthal, Homo neanderthal. And our conclusion is very interesting. She thinks that the main reason is that the Homo sapiens had established an alliance with wolves and dogs, wild dogs, to hunt, and that Neanderthal have not been able to do that, and that makes a real difference, a survival difference. So at the beginning of humanity, the links with animals have been very, very important, numerous and important.
So the second question is that he says that human beings can live well by educating themselves. So could human beings also make other species of animal fare well by taming them? So
the problem,
also, will this become a trend in the future?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's his question.
The problem is that humans always think that what he does makes the world better, which is basically not always true. And to think that to tame or to train an animal makes him better is a little bit audacious, I think. A little bit. Well, I don't know how far we can go in that direction. I'm not sure that most animals like to be trained. In the experience on ape languages I told you about, the chimpanzees involved were very eager to be trained, and the parrot too. But that's much more an exception than the rule. And as you know, the humans do not like either to be trained by other humans. That's the problem with schools.
Way of living, and they don't want to be trained, as you said. They have their own ways to live on this planet. I won't say that currently we don't really give them equal rights living on this planet. We've already destroyed a lot of them. I think the right way to live with animals, and also to make sure we survive in this planet under the climate change, all these crises, is to respect their way of living. And then to protect the environment they depend on, and to avoid disasters as the fire in the Amazons. And then already today, like in China, if you are going to travel from Beijing to Henan, you will see no wild animals all the way for this 2 hours train drive. And there are a lot of lands like this on the planet today, so we need to keep the remaining of those animals' paradise. And we need to see the chimpanzees in the future. We need our children and grandchildren also to see these large animals still exist. So I don't think we need to train them. And humans will not exist in this planet one day also. So why do they live our ways?
I would go a step further, maybe than you. I think that philosophers have to think also about what it means to keep animals, wild animals, alive. It's not only to let them go; it's also to be able to transform ourselves in order to understand what is their value, not only an ecological or a moral value, but a deep ontological values. I mean, they are part of us, and we are part of them.
Professor,
question is that you have attached much importance to the role of science fiction in the course of philosophical investigation. And I wonder, are there any possibilities that for science fictions themselves are conveying some a kind of system of philosophy, or if it's not the case, are science fictions just playing a part of the role in philosophical investigation? And if it is the case, then what is the difference between science fictions and thought experiments? Because as we all know, thought experiments are intended to highlight the human intuitions in the course of philosophical investigation. So what's the difference, or are they similar to each other?
Thank you for your questions about thought experiments. I think there are two problems with thought experiments. The first problem is that this is not experiments, and the second problem is that this is not thought. Okay, let me explain you a little bit about that. The thought experiences are experiences without any experience. That's precisely thought experiences, and experience is a way to relate to the world. If you do not do that, you do not do experience. You just do thought. And to think with such simplistic situation as the thought experience is not to think. If you wish to think about a phenomena, you have to take the phenomena in all its complexity. As a philosopher, you are not an engineer. You are not a scientist. You are not a scientist in the way that you do not look for proofs and repeatability of what you say. You are not an engineer in the way that you have not to build a device that will work. You are a philosopher. You have to think about the world and about the complexity of the world. If you think that you can think about the complexity of the world, aping the scientist by cutting small parts of the world to think about it, to think about nothing. And so thought experiments is neither thought nor experiments for me. That's just bullshit. And about science fiction, I think that we have to try to figure out what could be the philosophy compared to traditional science fiction. What is at stake is not the content of the science fiction stories. What is at stake is the narratives that are used in science fictions. And what is at stake is the imagination through these narratives, with the possibility to think about alternatives through scenarios, through mise-en-scène, through theatralization, dramatization of the situation, which is precisely the world. So to introduce science fictions in philosophy, it would mean to be able to reintroduce fictions into philosophy, to reintroduce stories, and not to describe stories, not to think about already done stories, but introducing stories in the work of philosophy itself, and modify the philosophy. I think that to think the new world, we have to invent a new kind of philosophy, not only a new philosophy, but a new kind of philosophy at the crossroad of science fiction or literature, because it could be also autobiography, as Günther Anders has done, and art, and like cinema, like videos, and so on. We have to break the frontiers of the genres in order to evolve a new kind of philosophy. For me, the only way to think the new world, the coming world.
So I'm just a follow-up on the question about the so-called academic discipline of philosophy. So in your talk, you mentioned that for philosophers in the new context, we need more conceptual rigor and imagination, and to break frontiers and make it an interdisciplinary pursuit. So my question is, do you think machines or artificial intelligence can conduct philosophical research and teach philosophy? And it's an existential question, like what makes philosophers so unique that AI cannot replace philosophers?
Okay, I was fearing that question. So last year I have given a talk at the University of Tokyo about that topic precisely. And the content of the topic was that philosophers, good news for you, the machines will replace you. But I was a little bit ruder, because the idea was not that a machine could replace a philosopher, but that machines could replace most philosophers as they currently do philosophy. If to do philosophy is to read text, to make comments, to find the meaning of the text in an academic, regular way, a machine can do that. If you wish to introduce imagination, if you wish to introduce transgression, if you wish to introduce really novelty in philosophy, a machine will not be able to do that. But who cares? Who knows? Basically, maybe the future of philosophy is to establish partnerships between human philosophers and machines that will lead to new philosophy. And that's a huge challenge. What could be such a philosophy? You know, what could be a philosophy that could use such machines, and what could they do? And one of the ideas was that a new kind of critiques of philosophy could be done. Because let me give you an example. You know the French philosopher Gilles Deleuze. Okay, the regular way to deal with Gilles Deleuze is to find, for a contemporary philosopher, is to find the topics and of the books of Gilles Deleuze, and to establish connections with other books or other parts, and discussions like that, and discussions with other philosophers he could have read, or could have whose work he could have used, and so on. Okay, with the deep learning techniques, let's figure out the possibility that you program a robot to be Gilles Deleuze. It reads, let's figure out that the program reads everything Gilles Deleuze has written, like a conscientious academic philosopher. And through that, and through the programmation that by deep learning is able to generate new books by Gilles Deleuze. But with the same kind of mind, because it would have done that through the training with all the books of Gilles Deleuze. So we will have new books of Gilles Deleuze about new topics. For instance, we could have books written quotation by Gilles Deleuze about deep learning. Deep learning, of course, I've never worked on deep learning, and he never knew deep learning. But a machine could write a book on deep learning as Deleuze could have done if he were still alive. So not a critic through a metacritic, but a critic through the generation of new books.
So in terms of the average philosopher that exists in human history can be remade.
Yeah.
But that's so crazy.
New kind of philosophy.
And I think they will definitely change the whole equal. I mean, it's so crazy. Like so
you could have also a PhD done by a computer scientist philosopher, or a philosopher computer scientist, or a computer philosopher scientist writer, who was an artist who will design a plateau and Gilles Deleuze, and whose PhD dissertation will be, or PhD work, not dissertation work, will be the discussion between Plato and Deleuze, as if Plato would have read Deleuze, and Deleuze would have the possibility to discuss with Plato.
But in terms of that, if then there is no philosophical merit of being a philosopher anymore. There's no merit of being a philosopher. Why there is no philosophical merit for being a philosopher anymore. Because every machine can be a philosopher and can be a more authentic philosopher than you do.
Okay, every machine could be a philosopher, but not like me. No, what it means is that precisely that diversity we have talked a lot during the talk could be applied to that field. In other words, we could have philosopher machines or machine philosophers, but it will not mean necessarily that all philosophy could be done by these machines. It just means that we will have these new kinds of philosophers.
So the next stage of philosophy is going to be the methodology of designing a philosopher. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, one of my class 3 years ago was, the title of the class was How to Invent a Philosopher.
Okay, the last question.
Thank you, Professor. I have to say I sympathize a lot with the presentation. I'm not so sure I agree. And you showed a picture of Nick Bostrom, who wrote a tremendous book.
Yeah.
Super intelligence. And in that book, you mentioned an example of how horses were replaced by machines, right? And he said that the horses were replaced for their physical capacity, so physical labor was not needed anymore, and hundreds of thousands of horses were unemployed all of a sudden. And then in the 80s and the 70s of the last century, a lot of humans lost their jobs because their cognitive capacities were replaced by machines that could do all the calculations, even creative things. Now we have machine learning that's also covering the creative processes. And the next level, we have the sentimental processes where machines have sensors and can feel. And the last level, I guess, would be the consciousness level of human beings. And if we look at all these steps, we see that what we're essentially doing is to form a machine that's closer and closer to human beings because they're designed by human beings. So they're replacing human beings essentially. And we look at why we do this. And I think that's an essential question. Why do we do that? And that's why we should go back to the horse. Because all these 5 steps, they're essentially exactly the same thing. It's exactly the same value system. We do that to become more efficient, to be more effective, to be more competitive with each other, against our nations, against other people. So I wonder, all this makes a lot of sense. And I ask this not as a point of criticism. Are we not missing the point of this presentation? Should we not spend more time in designing a different value system, rather than designing a perfect human being that's going to replace us?
Oh my God. First, I thank you for your questions. That will be very illuminating. First, I don't think that we have become more and more efficient, considering the fact that we are just destroying the planet. You know? To say that we are efficient is just a joke. So the question is, but your question is a very, very interesting one, nevertheless. Why do we do that? And I think that this is a real question, and I have no answers, but I can give you some trails to some indications, maybe to where to go. Another point, I'll be back on that, but another point you said is that we have machines that look like more and more like humans. And in your mind, I think it means a progress. I should have another interpretation. Machines are more like humans because humans are becoming more like machines. And because humans are becoming more like machines, of course, machines are becoming more like humans. And the one key notion for me is bureaucracy. For me, the key problem of artificial is the bureaucracy, the question of bureaucracy. The key questions of artificial intelligence is not consciousness, is not do we have machines that will have power over humans and so on. The key question is the question of the bureaucracy. And the key questions of artificial intelligence is who will control who? Of course, machines will not control humans. That's dreams or nightmares, I don't know. But that will not occur. But what will occur is that some people will control other people through these machines. That's the key point. And what is at stake with that kind of artificial intelligence is precisely the question of bureaucracy. An artificial intelligence is a super bureaucrat system. And we have to think of it about that. I am not a technophobe. I don't think that, that machines are bad. I feel desperately attracted by machines. I like machines, but I'm very suspicious about these machines. And I think that we will have big surprises about what will happen with these machines. For instance, last year at Tokyo, I have worked about the notion with one of my colleagues in robotics, notions of 2 years ago, the notions of pathetic machines. Machines that does, a pathetic machine is a machine that does nothing but to force you to take care of it. That's the future of the machine. And it's a very new kinds of machines, and we have to think about that. I think we will have great surprises, and I think that Bostrom has understood nothing about what is artificial intelligence.
I'm sorry, we will have to stop here, and so let's thank our speaker today again. Okay. I also want to
thank you for your attention and for your very smart questions, even if I didn't agree with all of them.
Okay. Thank you very much.